It was always cold in court. I don't know why they couldn't install proper heating, but in 47 years of work, I never saw it happen. My fingers got used to flying over the keys of the stenography machine, even when they were numb from the cold. They tapped like rain on a roof, fast, rhythmic, turning words into symbols. 75 years old, and my back remembers every day spent behind that strange device. My name is Merrick Tremble. I was a court stenographer for 47 years. 47 years of listening to other people's stories, murders and divorces, frauds and inheritances. While the lawyers played out their dramas and the judges banged their gavel, I sat quietly in the corner and wrote. Every word, every sigh, every objection, Your Honor. No one noticed me until I left. Then they suddenly realized that without a record, their words were worthless. All these years I saved money. Every paycheck, first 20%, then 30, and after my divorce from Violette, almost 50. I didn't spend it on fancy clothes, expensive restaurants, or new cars. My Adeline never understood that. Even as a teenager, she was ashamed of my old sweaters and worn briefcase. "Dad, why do you always look like you're wearing clothes from a thrift store?" she would ask, wrinkling her nose. She was 14 at the time, and her reputation among her peers meant more to her than anything else. I didn't explain. I just smiled and said, "It's warmer this way, dear." I didn't tell her about my dream. She wouldn't have understood anyway. A teenage girl wouldn't appreciate a 75-year-old man's desire to have a house by the lake with a terrace where he could drink coffee at dawn and listen to the water lapping against the rocks. Villette left when Adeline was 16. "Merrick, you love your savings more than you love us," she said as she packed her suitcases. Maybe she was right. I didn't object when she took half of what was in our joint accounts. But I didn't open the safe in the basement where the real savings were kept. Violet didn't look for it. She always believed what was on the surface. When Adeline married Windsor Flint, I hoped she would find happiness. But instead, she found the same dislike for my lifestyle. Windsor worked as an insurance appraiser, and every time we met, he looked at me with poorly concealed contempt. His gaze seemed to say, "An old man who saves on everything so he can die with money in his account." At the wedding, after a few glasses of champagne, he put his hand on my shoulder and said with feigned concern, "Merrick, you need to learn to spend money while you can still enjoy life. What's the point of saving for a rainy day if all your days are already gray?" I just nodded and took a sip from my glass. People don't understand the value of patience. They want everything at once. Big houses, luxury cars, exotic vacations. They buy it on credit and then spend their whole lives paying off debts. I preferred to wait. When the twins, Zamira and Havelock, were born, I hoped that my relationship with my daughter would improve. But Adeline only brought the children occasionally, and even then, not for long. She always found a reason to leave early. She had forgotten the children's milk, or Havelock had a fever. She felt uncomfortable in my small apartment, constantly looking around as if she were afraid of getting my modest furniture dirty. When my grandchildren turned 16, their visits practically stopped. Zamira was busy with ballet, and Havelock with soccer. At least that's what Adeline said on the phone every Christmas, explaining why they couldn't come. "Dad, you understand, the kids are so busy now. Zamira has a performance, and Havelock has to prepare for his exams. Maybe next year?" The next year was always the same. After retiring, I couldn't sit at home. The silence was oppressive, and my hands longed for the keyboard. So I agreed to work part-time, 3 nights a week, only for special cases when an experienced stenographer was needed. Young people didn't like night shifts, but by that time, I hardly slept at night, so the job was a lifesaver. The night court has its own atmosphere. Dim lights, the quiet footsteps of security guards, the rustling of paper. Emergency hearings related to high-profile arrests, sometimes interrogations that required immediate transcription. I loved this job even more than the day shift. Here, no one was distracted by phones. There were no yawning jurors, only the essence of the case, laid bare like a nerve. Over the years, my daughter had acquired a large house in the suburbs, a new SUV every 3 years, and membership in a country club. Windsor often borrowed money from colleagues to pay the next mortgage payment, and then bragged at family dinners about how well they were doing. "This year, we're planning to put a pool in the backyard," he would say, glancing at me. "Life's too short to put off pleasure, right, Merrick?" And I waited. I sat in my modest apartment, counted the numbers on my bank statements, and waited. Every month, the amount grew, slowly but surely. I knew exactly what kind of house I wanted and how much it cost. I kept an eye on the real estate market in Crestwood, a picturesque area by the lake where Violet and I used to go on picnics when Adeline was very young. One day, Adeline accidentally dropped her ring in the water, and I dove in for almost an hour until I found it. Villette laughed and said I was stubborn as a bull. Adeline cried with happiness when I surfaced with the ring. That was when I first thought I wanted to live by that lake, to watch the sun play in the water, to listen to the sound of the waves before going to sleep. And now, almost 50 years later, I was sitting in a real estate agent's office signing papers. Cyrus Galloway, a man in his 40s, couldn't believe it when I told him I was buying the house without a mortgage. "Mr. Trumbull, are you sure? $2,500,000 is a significant amount to pay in one lump sum." I just nodded and handed him the check. I didn't explain that over the years I had learned to invest, that my modest savings had turned into substantial capital thanks to patience and caution. Why? He wouldn't have understood. Just as Adeline didn't understand, just as Windsor didn't understand, just as my grandchildren, who had grown up without my involvement, didn't understand. The house was exactly as I had imagined it all these years. 3 stories with large windows overlooking the lake, a terrace encircling the second floor, and a garden sloping down to the water's edge. 5 bedrooms, although I only needed one. A spacious kitchen with an island in the middle where I could cook while watching the sunset. A fireplace in the living room where I planned to sit with a book on winter evenings. When I got the keys, I sat on the terrace until nightfall, looking at the water. 47 years of waiting, 56 notebooks where I recorded every cent I spent, 284 refusals of vacations, new clothes, restaurants, and concerts. All of this has now materialized in the house of my dreams. The move was quick. I never had many possessions. I ordered new furniture, choosing each piece with the care of a collector. For the first time in my life, I didn't look at the price tags, but chose what I really liked. An oak bed with a carved headboard, a dark chocolate-colored leather sofa, a solid cherry wood desk for my study. Things that would outlive me. I called Adeline when I was completely settled in. I didn't want to hear comments about wasting money, about how at my age I should be thinking about a retirement home, not buying a mansion. "Dad, is something wrong?" Her voice sounded puzzled. I rarely called her first. "I moved, Adeline. I wanted to give you my new address." "Moved? Where? To a retirement home?" There was hope in her voice that cut deeper than I expected. "No, I bought a house in Crestwood, by the lake." The silence on the other end was so long that I thought the connection had been lost. "In Crestwood? But that's a very expensive area." "Yes, it's not cheap." "Dad, are you serious? Where did you get the money?" I explained briefly without going into detail. I told her that I had been saving my whole life, that I had invested wisely, that I had always dreamed of this house. She listened silently, then burst out with reproaches. "You had money all this time? When Mom asked for a vacation, when I needed to pay for college, when the twins wanted to go to summer camp, you had money all this time, and you didn't say anything?" "I had savings that I was putting aside for a specific purpose." "For a house you don't need at 75? Seriously, Dad?" I didn't argue. I just gave her the address and said I'd be happy if she came to see it. She hung up without saying goodbye. The first few weeks in the new house were like a dream. I woke up at dawn, went out on the terrace with a cup of coffee, and watched the sun rise over the lake. Then I would take long walks along the shore, read in the garden, and cook dinner in my new kitchen. In the evenings, I would sit by the fireplace and listen to old jazz records. 3 nights a week, I still spent in court, recording other people's dramas and tragedies. There were few neighbors. The houses were far apart, hidden by trees and hedges. But one morning, as I was working in the garden, a gray-haired man with a weather-beaten face leaned over the fence. "Good morning. You're the new neighbor, right? I'm Obadiah Wenworth. I live in the house on the right." We got talking. Obadiah turned out to be a former lighthouse keeper who had retired 10 years ago. Now he grew roses and was writing a book about sea legends. We quickly found common ground. 2 elderly men who preferred quiet and simple pleasures to the noise of modern life. Adeline arrived a month after my call. Without warning, with Windsor and the twins. I had just returned from the night shift and was making breakfast when I heard the doorbell ring. There she stood on the doorstep, my daughter, whom I had hardly seen in recent years. 42 years old, but still beautiful, with Violette's eyes and my stubborn chin. Behind her loomed Windsor in an expensive suit, and behind him the twins, tall and thin, with phones in their hands. "Dad," she said without a smile, "we decided to stop by and see your new house." I invited them in and offered them coffee and freshly baked rolls. They entered, looking around with undisguised surprise. Windsor whistled when he saw the panoramic windows and the view of the lake. "Damn, Merrick, you live like a king." Zamira and Havelock immediately scattered around the house, photographing every room. I could hear their exclamations from the upper floors. "There's a whole library here. Look, there's a hot tub. Have you seen the wine cellar? There are bottles here that cost more than my car." Adeline sat across from me, clutching her coffee cup as if she wanted to crush it. "Why, Dad?" she finally asked. "Why did you hide from us that you could afford all this?" "I didn't hide it. It was just money for a specific purpose. But you saw how Windsor and I struggled to pay for the children's education, how we skimped on vacations. All this time you could have helped, but you chose this." She gestured around the living room with its high ceilings and antique furniture. "This is my home, Adeline. What I've dreamed of for 50 years. At your age," she shook her head, "why do you need 5 bedrooms? Why do you need a wine cellar and a terrace? You don't even drink wine. It's just selfish, Dad." Windsor returned to the living room, still looking around with an appraiser's eye. "How much did you pay for it, Merrick?" "2 million. 3? 2.5, I replied, seeing no point in hiding it. He whistled again, then laughed. "And all this time we thought you were barely making ends meet. Damn, you're richer than all of us put together." Adeline shot her husband a warning glance, but it was too late. I saw what I had always suspected. They considered me a poor relative, a burden they had to take care of out of a sense of duty. Now their attitudes had changed. I could see the calculation in their eyes. "Dad," Adeline softened her tone, "this house is too big for you to live in alone. Maybe we could, help you with it? Come over on weekends, look after the garden?" I saw Windsor nudge her discreetly with his elbow and realized they were already mentally dividing up my house, imagining how they would throw parties here, invite friends over, show off the view of the lake. "Thanks for the offer, but I'm managing. Besides, I'm still working nights at the courthouse." "Working? At your age?" Windsor didn't hide his surprise. "Why?" "Because I like it. Because my mind is still sharp and my fingers are still fast." The twins returned to the living room and sat down on the sofa with their phones in their hands. "Grandpa," Zamira looked at me for the first time during the entire visit, "you don't mind if we come here with friends sometimes, do you? The beach here is so cool." I looked at her, a tall, beautiful girl who barely knew me, who didn't even call on my birthday, who was now looking not at me, but at the house I had bought with my entire life. "We'll see, Zamira. We'll see." They left an hour later, leaving me with the feeling that the house had been invaded. Adeline hugged me goodbye for the first time in many years and whispered, "Now you understand that we need to make up for lost time, Dad. Family should stick together." Mornings in Crestwood begin with fog. It spreads over the lake, envelops the piers and boats, penetrates the garden, and stops at the windows as if hesitant to enter the house. I fell in love with these early morning hours immediately. I wake up at 5:30 when the sun is just breaking through the horizon, make strong tea, and go out onto the terrace with a blanket. I sit and watch as the fog slowly dissipates, revealing the lake in all its glory. My new life in this house began with arranging the furniture. Most of my belongings were delivered directly here: the bed, sofas, armchairs, tables. But I transported the books, records, kitchen utensils, and clothes myself in my old Volvo, which, despite 17 years of service, still ran like clockwork. 6 trips between my old apartment and my new home, and my former life was completely packed into cardboard boxes. It took 2 weeks to unpack. I took my time, enjoying the process. Each book found its place on the library shelves, each record in a special cabinet next to the record player. I arranged the kitchen utensils, hung clothes in the spacious dressing room, laid out towels in the bathrooms. And with each item finding its place, the house became more and more mine. I turned the room on the third floor overlooking the northern part of the lake into a study. I put a desk by the window and hung up a few photos that remained from the past. Adeline at 5 years old with a lollipop bigger than her face, Violette in an off-the-shoulder dress, a photo from our first meeting in the university library, my parents in front of their small house in Providence, and one new one, a panorama of the lake that I took on the first day after moving in. In the second week, I took up gardening. It was neglected. The previous owners rarely visited in the last year before the sale. Weeds had taken over the flower beds, the hedge had grown into a shapeless mass, and the paths were overgrown with moss. I bought some gardening tools and set to work. At 75, my back is not what it used to be, but my hands are still strong, and I have always had patience in abundance. It was in the garden that I met Obadiah again. He appeared at the fence while I was trimming a hydrangea bush and called out to me, "Good morning, neighbor. I see you're serious about tackling these weeds." Obadiah looked like a man who had spent his whole life in the fresh air. The wrinkles on his face were a map of his life. Deep around his eyes from constantly squinting against the sun, thin around his mouth from smiling. His gray hair was cut short, and his hands were covered with old scars and fresh scratches from working with roses. "Good morning," I replied, straightening up and rubbing my lower back. "The garden is neglected, but it has potential." "You bet," Obadiah leaned on the fence. "The previous owners had amazing flower beds here. Mrs. Hampton grew peonies that attracted visitors from all over Crestwood. If you like, I can give you a few tips on the soil here. It's tricky." That's how we got to know Obadiah Wentworth, a former lighthouse keeper, amateur gardener, and, as it turned out, a pretty good chess player. We started spending our evenings playing chess on his porch or my terrace, sharing stories and observations. Obadiah had lived in Crestwood for 15 years. He knew every family, every house, every local legend. From him, I learned that a giant catfish supposedly lives in the northern part of the lake, which no one for 30 years. That the house with blue shutters, 3 lots away from mine, belonged to a famous writer who published under a pseudonym. That on Wednesdays, the local cafe, the Boater, had the best blueberry pies in the state. "What about your family?" he asked once as we sat on his porch watching the sunset. "Do your children and grandchildren come to visit?" I told him about Adeline, her husband Windsor, and the twins. I didn't go into detail, but I didn't hide the complexity of our relationship either. "My daughter thinks I've been a miser all my life," I said, making a move with my knight. "She doesn't understand that I was saving money for a specific purpose. To her, it looked like I was denying her and my grandchildren for the sake of abstract savings." Obadiah rubbed his chin thoughtfully, studying the board. "People often don't understand those who live differently. For them, saving money is necessarily stinginess, not discipline for the sake of a dream." "Exactly. And her husband—" I paused, searching for the right words. "Windsor always looked at me like I was a failure. An old man with a low-paying job, no ambition, no style. He's an insurance appraiser. Suit, tie, expensive car on credit. For him, success is measured by external attributes." "And now they know about the house?" "Yes. They came last week, and I saw how their attitude changed. Before they looked right through me, now they look at me with interest. But not at me. At the house, at the money I apparently have." Obadiah made a move with his rook, taking my bishop. "Check. Be careful, Merrick. Sudden wealth often attracts people who didn't notice you before, especially relatives. I protected the king by moving him to a safe square." "I know. Adeline has already offered to help me with the house. Come over on weekends, take care of the garden, and her daughter wants to bring her friends to the beach." "And what did you say?" "Evasive. I don't want to argue, but I also don't want my house to turn into a resort for people who ignored me for years." Obadiah nodded as he made his next move. "Reasonable. You know, my children aren't frequent visitors either. They have their own lives in big cities. They call sometimes and send cards at Christmas. But I'm not offended. That's life. The young ones fly the nest and build their own." We ended the game in a draw and agreed to go to the plant nursery the next day. Obadiah wanted to show me the varieties of roses suitable for the local climate. Working nights at the courthouse became even more enjoyable after the move. Whereas before I would return to a cramped apartment where the walls seemed to close in on me, now I had a spacious house with a view of the lake waiting for me. The drive from the courthouse to Crestwood took 40 minutes, just enough time to switch from work mode to home mode. I loved those night drives. Empty roads, sparse streetlights, silence in the car. Sometimes I would put on old jazz compositions, Duke Ellington or Thelonious Monk. Sometimes I would just listen to the sound of the engine and think about the cases I had recorded that night. Over the years working in court, I saw so many family dramas, inequitably divided inheritances, brothers and sisters ready to destroy each other over their father's house, children suing their parents, parents depriving their children of their inheritance. I was always amazed at how easily family ties were broken when money was involved. Money doesn't corrupt people, Judge Baker once told me after a particularly difficult divorce case. It just shows who they really are. I often recalled these words as I watched Adeline and Windsor's reaction to my new home. They had always been like that, calculating, judging people by their financial status. It's just that before, I was in the poor relative category, and now I've moved into the rich relative category. But I haven't changed. I'm still the same Merrick Trumbull, a court stenographer with a love of jazz and chess. The night shift usually ended at 3 in the morning. I would come home around 4, take a shower, and sleep until 9 or 10. Then breakfast on the terrace, work in the garden, or reading in the library. Sometimes I would go into town for groceries or meet Obadiah for a game of chess. This measured life was exactly what I had dreamed of all these years. Silence broken only by the sound of waves and the cries of seagulls. A space that belonged only to me. The freedom to do what I wanted, when I wanted, without having to conform to anyone else's expectations. Adeline called 2 weeks after their visit. Her voice sounded unnaturally cheerful. "Dad, how are you? How's the house? Not too lonely there by yourself?" "Everything's fine, Adeline. I'm not lonely. I read a lot, got to know my neighbors, work in the garden." "That's good, Dad, very good," she paused. "Listen, Windsor and I were thinking, maybe we could come over this weekend. We could help you with the garden and bring lunch. Havelock could mow the lawn. A little physical work would do him good." I felt my shoulders tense. They had never offered to help before. They had never just come over for the weekend. "I'm working this weekend, Adeline. Night shift on Friday and Saturday." Oh, the disappointment in her voice was almost palpable. "You're still working nights? At your age and with your abilities?" It seems strange. "I like my job," I replied simply. "But the house needs attention, Dad." "Such a big house, the garden, and it's all on your shoulders. We could help. Windsor is great at maintaining pools, and I could take care of the interior. Some of the rooms look a little empty." I looked around. My house was furnished exactly as I wanted it. Minimalist but cozy. Every item was in its place. Nothing superfluous. "Thanks for the offer, Adeline. But I like the house the way it is." She sighed. That special sigh she used when she thought I was being unreasonable. "Okay, Dad. But if you change your mind, we're always ready to come. Anytime." After our conversation, I sat on the terrace for a long time, looking at the lake. Something had changed in our relationship, and I wasn't sure I liked it. Adeline used to call once a month, short, formal conversations about the weather and health. Now she was taking an active interest in my life. But was she interested in me or just my house? The next day, Obadiah and I went to the plant nursery. He helped me choose roses for the south side of the garden and hydrangeas for the shady areas. On the way back, we stopped at the Boater, the cafe with the blueberry pies. "Something's bothering you, Merrick," Obadiah said as we waited for our order. "Want to talk about it?" I shared my doubts about my daughter and her family's sudden interest. Maybe I'm being unfair to them. Maybe they really want to mend fences. Obadiah was silent for a long time, stirring his coffee. "You know, when I worked at the lighthouse, there was a fisherman named Garrett. He sailed by every day, never waving or saying hello, for years. And then his boat broke down during a storm. He sailed up to the lighthouse and became my best friend. Smiles, jokes, gratitude. As soon as I helped him fix his boat, he stopped noticing the lighthouse again. People often befriend not you, but what they need from you." The pies were truly delicious, juicy, with a perfect balance of sweetness and tartness. We ate in silence, each lost in our own thoughts. "It's not that I don't want to see my daughter and grandchildren," I said as we were walking back to the car. I just don't want them to treat my house as their property. I've waited too long for him. Then set boundaries, Obadiah replied. Be clear about what is and isn't acceptable. Don't expect them to figure it out for themselves. In the evening, I sat in my office, preparing for the night shift. I was going through notes from previous meetings and checking the stenography machine. Outside the window, dusk was falling, painting the lake in shades of purple. At that moment, the phone rang. The screen lit up with Zamira's name, for the first time in many months. Grandpa? Her voice sounded unexpectedly soft. It's Zamira. I just wanted to see how you were doing. I tensed, expecting a catch. Zamira never called just like that. Thank you, Zamira. I'm fine. Getting ready for work. It's cool that you're still working. Many people your age are already, sitting in a rocking chair watching TV. I couldn't help the irony. She laughed, nervously, unnaturally. No, of course not. It's just great. Listen, Grandpa, I was thinking, my friends and I are graduating soon, and we wanted to throw a small party. Nothing fancy, 15 to 20 people. And your house by the lake would be the perfect place. We'd clean everything up afterwards, I promise. So that's what it was. Not a call from his granddaughter to her grandfather, but a request to use his house for a party. Zamira, I don't think that's a good idea. I value peace and quiet in my home. But Grandpa, her voice took on a pleading tone, it's graduation. It only happens once in a lifetime. And your house is so big and you work nights anyway, we wouldn't even cross paths. I'm sorry, Zamira, but no. Maybe you could have the party at your parents' house. Their yard is too small, and the neighbors are always complaining about the noise. And you have such a secluded place. Now please, Grandpa, I've never asked you for anything that was true. She had never asked me for anything, because she had hardly spoken to me before the house on the lake appeared. I'm sorry, Zamira, but the answer is no, she snorted, the same sound Adeline used to make as a teenager when she didn't get her way. Okay, sorry to bother you. She hung up without saying goodbye. I put down the phone and looked at the lake, now almost black in the darkness. Strange. All my life I had dreamed of a large, friendly family, of grandchildren coming to visit on weekends, of family dinners on the terrace, of walks together along the shore. But instead I got relatives who were only interested in my house. An hour later I was already in court, setting up my stenography machine for the night session. Here, among familiar sounds and smells, among people who valued me for my professionalism rather than the size of my bank account, I felt at home. My fingers ran easily over the keys, turning words into symbols that would later become the official record. Your Honor, said the prosecutor, a tall man with sharp features, the defendant deliberately misled his family about the company's financial situation. I typed without listening to the substance of the case. Another financial dispute, another family destroyed by money. The usual story. I returned home at 4 a.m, tired but with a sense of accomplishment. My house greeted me with silence and coolness. I took a shower, drank a glass of warm milk, and went to bed, looking at the stars through the panoramic window of my bedroom. At that moment, I was absolutely happy. I had the house of my dreams, a job I loved, and a new friend in Obadiah. Summer nights in court always seemed particularly stifling to me. Despite the air conditioning, the air in the courtroom remained heavy, filled with tension and fatigue. That Wednesday, a real estate fraud case was being heard, yet another scheme involving inflated prices and forged documents. My fingers moved almost mechanically across the keys of the stenography machine, recording testimony, objections, and the judge's comments. At one point, I caught myself thinking that, in 47 years of work, I had recorded more human drama than most writers could invent in a lifetime. The hearing ended at 3:30 a.m. I packed up my equipment, said goodbye to the night guard Silas, and went out to the parking lot. It was a warm night with a scattering of stars in the dark sky. I got into my car and closed my eyes for a moment. Fatigue washed over me in waves, but I had a 40-minute drive ahead of me to Crestwood, and I needed to stay alert. The road was almost empty at that hour. The occasional headlights of oncoming cars, the quiet hum of the engine, jazz coming from the speakers, all of this created a special atmosphere that I had come to appreciate over the past few months. Night drives had become a time for reflection, when no one called, asked, or demanded anything. just me, the road, and the music. When I turned into the driveway of my house, the clock on the dashboard read 4:25. The first rays of dawn were already painting the sky in the east a soft pink. I turned off the engine and admired my house for a moment. 3 stories of dark wood and glass reflecting the pre-dawn sky. Even now, months after buying it, the sight of this house, my house, filled me with a deep sense of satisfaction. "Good morning, Merrick." Obadiah's voice made me jump. I hadn't noticed my neighbor standing by the hedge that separated our properties. "Obadiah, what are you doing up so early?" I got out of the car, feeling my fatigue give way to surprise. "Roses are best watered at dawn," he said, pointing to the watering can in his hand. "And you, as always, are back from work?" I nodded, moving closer. Obadiah looked unusually tense, his usually relaxed posture replaced by a certain stiffness. He shifted from foot to foot, glancing at my house, as if he wanted to say something, but couldn't bring himself to do so. "Is something wrong, Obadiah?" I asked, feeling a growing sense of unease. He paused, put the watering can on the ground, and rubbed his chin, a gesture I had already learned to recognize as a sign of his inner struggle. "Listen, Merrick, I don't want to be the neighbor who sticks his nose into other people's business, but," he paused, "when you're not home, there are some pretty noisy parties going on." I froze, trying to make sense of his words. "Parties in my house?" "Yes," Obadiah nodded, clearly feeling uncomfortable. "For the last 2 weeks, they usually start in the evening, around 7 or 8 when you're already at work. Cars, music, people on the terrace." "But that's impossible," I objected. "I have an alarm system, and I'm the only one with the keys." Obadiah shrugged. "I'm just saying what I saw. Yesterday was especially noisy. The music played until 2 in the morning. I wanted to call you, but I thought maybe you had given permission. To your family, for example." My family, of course. Who else could be throwing parties at my house? Memories of recent phone calls and visits flashed through my mind. Adeline offering to help with the house, Samira asking to throw a graduation party, Windsor assessing each room with the eye of a real estate agent. "Thanks for telling me," I said, trying to keep my voice calm, even though I was boiling inside. "I'll take care of it." Obadiah nodded, clearly relieved that the conversation was over. "Let me know if you need any help." And I'm sorry if I was wrong. I walked slowly toward the house, my thoughts confused with fatigue and anxiety. How did they get inside? When I installed the security system, I set it to recognize only my fingerprint. If someone had tried to break down the door or smash a window, the alarm would have gone off immediately, and I would have received a notification on my phone. As soon as I entered the house, I immediately sensed that something was wrong. The smell, a mixture of perfume, alcohol, and food. Smells that shouldn't be in an empty house. I walked into the living room and stopped, looking around. At first glance, everything was fine. The furniture was in place, nothing was broken. But upon closer inspection, the details began to form an alarming picture. On the coffee table, there were rings from glasses on the polished surface. On the sofa, there was a small pillow that usually lay in the armchair by the window. On the floor by the fireplace, there were crumbs from chips or crackers. These were small things that most people would not notice, but I, accustomed to perfect order, saw them all. My heart began to beat faster. I went upstairs and looked into the guest bedrooms. The sheets on one of the beds were rumpled, even though I clearly remembered making it after washing the sheets. In the bathroom, there were used towels thrown on the floor and water droplets on the mirror. The wine cellar. A sudden thought made me almost run downstairs and open the door to the basement. Turning on the light, I descended the wooden steps. The cellar was my pride and joy, a small collection of rare wines that I had started collecting immediately after buying the house. Not because I drank a lot myself, a glass or two on special occasions, no more. But I like the idea of collecting, the process of choosing, studying the history of each bottle. I immediately noticed the empty spaces on the shelves. 3 bottles, a 2010 Bordeaux that I bought at auction, and 2 Italian Reds, whose names I couldn't remember now. 2 crystal glasses from the set that stood on the table at the entrance were also missing. Going back up to the living room, I walked over to the cabinet where the security system equipment was stored. The security camera monitors were turned off. I didn't usually leave them on all the time to save electricity. Turning on the system, I opened the archive of recordings from the last 2 weeks. The first recording was from last Tuesday. The camera at the front door showed Adeline, Windsor, Zemi, and Havelock approaching the house around 7 in the evening. Adeline was holding a key, the spare key I had given her just in case, when she insisted on it during their first visit. The security system didn't work. She obviously knew the code, which I, like a fool, had told her when she asked just out of curiosity. They entered the house as if it were their own, turned on the lights and opened the windows. Half an hour later, the first guests began to arrive. 5 middle-aged couples, well-dressed, with bottles of wine and gift bags. Windsor greeted them at the door, smiling broadly and gesturing for them to come in. Adeline bustled about in the kitchen, arranging appetizers on my best plates. I switched cameras, watching my house turn into a reception area. The living room, the terrace, the kitchen, even the library. Everywhere there were people with glasses, laughing, talking, touching my things. Windsor was giving some kind of tour, showing them around the house, gesturing wildly. Without sound, I couldn't hear what he was saying, but it was clear from the expressions on the guests' faces that they were impressed. The last car left around 11 in the evening. Adeline and Windsor stayed the night, taking the master bedroom, my bedroom. The twins settled into the guest rooms. In the morning, they left, leaving the house in the mess I now noticed. I scrolled through the recordings. Thursday evening again. This time, only the twins arrived with a group of friends, a noisy bunch of teenagers who scattered throughout the house. They swam in the lake, grilled something on my barbecue, drank beer from my fridge. Havelock turned the stereo up full blast, and the camera on the terrace showed the neighbors' windows going dark as people closed their shutters to escape the noise. Saturday, Adeline and Windsor again, this time with a different group of guests, noisier, less formal. Barbecue on the terrace, dancing in the living room, someone smoking on the second-floor balcony. At one point, one of the guests, a man in his 50s with a receding hairline, asked Windsor something, pointing to the house. I turned on the sound. Suonuam, an impressive place. Have you had it for a long time? The man asked. Oh, we acquired it recently. Windsor adjusted his tie with a smug smile. You know what they say, hard work and smart investments always pay off. The blood rushed to my face. He was passing off my house as his own. The house I had bought with 47 years of savings and sacrifices. He had casually appropriated with a few words. I continued to look through the records, and the picture became clearer and darker. In 2 weeks, there had been 6 parties at my house. 2 business parties organized by Windsor for colleagues and clients, 3 teenage parties thrown by the twins, and 1 family gathering with Adeline's relatives whom I didn't even know. The most disturbing thing was that they weren't just using the house. They were treating it and its contents as their own property. Windsor opened my best wines, Zamira tried on my antique marine binoculars as an accessory, and Havelock used my study to play video games on my computer's big screen. Adeline had rearranged some of the paintings, moved the furniture in the living room for better energy flow, and seemed to have thrown away the old photographs that stood on the mantelpiece, pictures from my youth that I had carefully preserved. In the last recording, dated last night, Windsor was standing on the terrace with a glass of my collectible whiskey, talking to a group of men in suits. I turned on the sound. Yeah, of course, formally the house belongs to my father-in-law. He took a sip, smiling. But he's an old man. He lives at work and sleeps. The old fool clings to his job, even though he's long overdue for a nursing home. This house is too big for one person, especially one of his age. My wife and I are already looking for a good facility for him. You know, with nurses, doctors, everything he needs. And then he gestured toward the terrace, the lake, the garden. All of this will be completely ours. The men nodded understandingly. One patted Windsor on the shoulder. Smart. Why would an old man who's going to die soon anyway need a house like this? He made an expressive gesture, running his thumb across his throat. They laughed. Everyone, including my brother-in-law. I turned off the monitor, feeling a wave of anger rise inside me that I had never experienced before in my life. They weren't just using my house without permission. They were planning to take it away completely, putting me in a nursing home. Me, a person with a clear mind, good health, and a job I loved, they had already written off, dividing up my property. My phone rang, snapping me out of my stupor. Adeline's name lit up on the screen. I took a deep breath, trying to calm down, and answered, "Dad?" Her voice sounded unnaturally cheerful. "How are you?" I was thinking, maybe we could stop by tonight? Windsor needs to discuss a project with his colleagues, and your house would be the perfect place to meet. Nothing special, 10 to 15 people max. I remained silent, not trusting my voice. "Dad? Are you there?" Her tone became irritated. "Yes, Adeline, I'm here," I finally replied, trying to sound normal. "I'm sorry, but I can't make it tonight. I have plans. Plans?" She didn't hide her surprise. "What plans?" "You just got off work." "I have a meeting with my lawyer," I lied, surprised at how easy it was. "I need to discuss some issues with the will." There was silence on the other end of the line. Then Adeline spoke again, in a different tone, soft, caring. "Dad, are you okay? Should we come over to help, if you're not feeling well?" "I'm perfectly fine, Adeline. I just want to make sure my affairs are in order." Of course," she said too quickly. "That's right. But you would tell us if something was wrong, right? We're family. A word that should have meant support, love, trust. Instead, it meant people who were waiting for me to die so they could take over my house." "Of course," I replied. "Listen, I have to go. We'll talk later." I hung up without waiting for a response. The fatigue that had receded in the face of the shock of what I had seen now came back with a vengeance. I went up to the bedroom, my bedroom, where Adeline and Windsor slept, and lay down without undressing. Sleep did not come. My thoughts revolved around what I had seen, heard, and understood. All my life I had tried to be a good father. After Violette left, I worked 2 jobs so that Adeline could go to a good college. I saved money for her wedding, even though it meant postponing my dream of a house by the lake for another year. I never interfered in her life with Windsor, even though I could see he wasn't the kind of man who would make her happy. I tried to be a good grandfather to the twins, even though they always looked right through me, busy with their phones and friends. And this is how they repaid me. With invasion, lies, plans to take away the only thing I truly earned and deserved. I got up and walked to the window. The sun was already high in the sky, and the lake sparkled like molten silver. The beauty I had waited for all my life was now overshadowed by the betrayal of those closest to me. "No," I said aloud, surprising myself with the firmness of my voice. "No, this is my home, and I won't let them take it away." A plan began to form in my head, not clear, but clear in its purpose. I couldn't just ask them to stop. They would apologize, promise to do better, and continue behind my back. I needed something more radical, something they wouldn't expect from an old man who should be in a nursing home. I picked up the phone and dialed Obadiah's number. I needed an ally, and I knew I could trust him. "Obadiah, it's Merrick. Remember you said you'd help? I need your help. And something else. Do you know a good locksmith who could come today? I need to change all the locks in the house." I spent the next 2 days preparing for the inevitable. The locksmith Obadiah recommended came that same day and replaced all the locks in the house. I also called a security specialist who reconfigured the entire alarm system with new codes and added additional cameras in places that were not previously covered. The phone was ringing off the hook with calls from Adeline, but I didn't answer. I needed time to cool down and collect my thoughts. On the third day, Saturday, I decided it was time to put an end to this charade. I called Adeline and invited her and her family over for Sunday lunch. "We need to talk," I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. "Of course, Dad." She seemed delighted. "We'll be there around 1. Can I bring anything?" "No, just come," I replied, not wanting to continue the conversation. Obadiah came to see me in the evening as I sat on the terrace watching the sunset. He brought a bottle of whiskey and 2 glasses. "How are you?" he asked, sitting down opposite me. "Getting ready for war," I replied half jokingly, but without smiling. He poured us both a small measure and raised his glass. "To justice." We drank in silence. The amber liquid burned my throat, but it was a good feeling, a reminder that I was still alive and capable of feeling. "You know, there was one unwritten truth at the lighthouse," Obadiah began, twirling the glass in his hands. "If you don't set boundaries, the sea will take everything. The waves never stop. They always try. They always push. Only a firm boundary can hold them back." I nodded, understanding the metaphor. My family was like the sea, ruthless, relentless, ready to swallow everything I had created. I'm going to set a very firm boundary tomorrow, I said. And you're right to do so, Obadiah finished his whiskey. If you need support, I'm in the house next door. One call and I'll be here. He left, leaving me alone with my thoughts and a bottle of whiskey. I didn't drink anymore. I needed a clear head for tomorrow's conversation. Sunday morning was surprisingly clear and warm. I woke up early, took my usual walk along the lake, then made a simple lunch: roast chicken, mashed potatoes, salad. Nothing special, but I didn't see the point in trying. This lunch was not for celebration, but for a conversation that was long overdue. At exactly 1 o'clock, I heard the sound of a car pulling up. A minute later, the doorbell rang. They couldn't come in on their own. The new locks made sure of that. I opened the door. The whole family was standing on the doorstep. Adeline with a forced smile, Windsor, as always, in a suit even on his day off, and the twins both with phones in their hands. "Dad, we're so happy to see you." Adeline stepped forward, intending to hug me, but something in my gaze stopped her. "Come in," I said dryly, stepping aside. They walked into the living room, looking around with slight confusion. Did they notice the new security cameras, or did they sense the change in atmosphere? "Did something happen to the door?" Windsor asked, adjusting his tie. "Our key didn't work." "I changed all the locks," I replied, pointing them to the sofa. "Sit down. We need to talk." They exchanged glances but obediently sat down, Adeline and Windsor on the sofa, the twins in the armchairs on either side. I remained standing, feeling a strange advantage in my position. "I know you've been throwing parties at my house when I'm away," I began without preamble. There was a moment of silence. Adeline paled, Windsor frowned, and the twins suddenly became interested in their phones. "Dad, we can explain," Adeline began, but I raised my hand to stop her. "I saw the security camera footage. All of it. For the entire 2 weeks." I walked over to the TV and turned it on. The screen showed the living room camera feed. Windsor giving the guests a tour, presenting the house as his own. "A small purchase, but we like it," he said on the recording, smiling broadly. I turned off the TV and turned to face them. Windsor's face turned red, and Adeline covered her mouth with her hand. "You invaded my home, used it for your parties, drank my wine, ate my food. You," I pointed at Windsor, "presented my house as your own, bragged about it to your colleagues and clients. And you," I looked at the twins, "brought your friends here and threw parties, not caring about my property." I expected apologies, embarrassment, maybe even tears. But what happened next took me by surprise. Windsor stood up straight and crossed his arms over his chest. "So what? It's a family home, isn't it? Why would one person need such a huge house? 5 bedrooms, a library, a wine cellar, all that for one old man?" I felt the blood rush to my face. "This is my house, which I bought with my own money." My voice remained surprisingly calm despite the storm inside. "Money you saved your whole life by denying your family," Adeline interrupted, jumping up from the sofa. "Do you know how many times I had to borrow from friends because you refused to help? How many opportunities the twins missed because we didn't have money for extra lessons? I paid for your college, Adeline. Your wedding. I gave you money for the twins' birth," I reminded her. "The bare minimum. You gave the absolute minimum while secretly saving millions." Her voice trembled with indignation. "And you spent it on a house that stands empty most of the time," Windsor added with a contemptuous smirk, "when we could have been using it, enjoying it. Family should share, Merrick, or have you forgotten what family is?" I looked at them, unable to believe my ears. Not only were they not apologizing, they were accusing me. Me, whose only sin was to have realized my dream. "A family doesn't barge into someone else's house without permission," I said quietly. "A family doesn't lie. A family doesn't plan to send their father to a nursing home to get their hands on his property." My last words provoked a reaction. Adeline flinched. Windsor looked away. "I don't know what you're talking about," he muttered. I turned the TV back on, this time showing the recording from the terrace. Windsor with a glass of my whiskey, telling his friends about his plans to send me to a nursing home. "And then it will all be ours." His voice sounded smug and confident. I turned off the TV and looked at them. A heavy silence hung in the room. "Dad, it's not what you think," Adeline finally said. her voice softening. We're just worried about you. This house is too big. You work nights. You live alone. It's not safe at your age. I'm 75, not 95, I replied. I'm in perfect health, with a clear mind and a strong memory. I don't need your care, but you can't deny that this house is too big for one person, Windsor interjected, clearly trying to change tactics. We just wanted it to be used, to have life in it. Is that so wrong? What's wrong is that you did it behind my back. What's wrong is that you lied to your friends, presenting my house as your own. What's wrong is that you planned my future without me. Samira, who had been silent until now, suddenly looked up from her phone. But Grandpa, you're hardly ever here anyway. You work at night, sleep during the day. What difference does it make if we bring friends over sometimes? It makes a difference in terms of respect, Samira, in terms of understanding that this is not your property. But someday it will be our, Havelock interjected for the first time. You're not going to live forever, Grandpa. I felt a chill run down my spine at those words. My own family sat in front of me, openly discussing my inheritance, as if I were already dead. Adeline shot her son a warning glance, but it was too late. You see, Dad, children are just careless with their word. But the point is, we're a family. We should support each other, share what we have. Share, I repeated, remembering all the years they hadn't called, hadn't visited, hadn't taken an interest in my life. It's strange to hear this from people who only remembered I existed after they found out about the house. That's not fair, Dad, Adeline said, getting up from the sofa and coming over to me. We've always cared about you. We just have our own lives, our own problems, which you've now decided to solve at my expense. I finished for her. Windsor also stood up, his face regaining its confident expression. Listen, Merrick, let's face it. You're not young anymore. Sooner or later, you're going to need help. With the house, with your health, with everything. We're just looking ahead, making plans. That's not a crime. Planning to send me to a nursing home and take over my house? No, it's not a crime. It's just mean. Windsor smirked, his patience clearly wearing thin. Call it what you want, but you can't deny the logic. This house is worth $2.5 million. At your age, you should be thinking about how to ensure a comfortable retirement, not clinging to material possessions. And you, of course, are ready to help me not cling to my house. I couldn't help but be sarcastic. Exactly, he didn't catch the irony. We could take over the management of the house right now. You would live here, of course, but we would take care of everything. Bills, repairs, cleaning. And when the time comes, when I become too old and frail, when you need specialized care, he corrected diplomatically, we'll find a good place with the best doctors, and the house will remain in the family just as you would want. I looked at him, amazed at his audacity. He spoke about my future, my house, my life with such confidence, as if he had the right to do so. You've all completely misunderstood the situation, I said finally. This house is my dream, my reward for years of hard work and saving. I'm not going to share it with anyone, especially people who don't respect me enough to barge into my house without permission. So you'd rather live alone in a huge empty house than let your family enjoy it? Adeline looked at me with undisguised reproach. That's selfish, Dad. No, Adeline. Selfishness is thinking you have a right to something just because you want it. I earned this house. I paid for it. I have the right to decide who can be in it and when. But we're your family. She was almost shouting now. A family respects each other's boundaries, I replied calmly. A family doesn't lie, steal, or plan to get rid of their elders for financial gain. Windsor walked over to Adeline and put his hand on her shoulder. See, dear? I told you. He's become even more stubborn and suspicious. It's his age. Soon he'll start forgetting things, getting confused. I'm standing right here, Windsor, I raised my voice, and I can hear every word you say. My memory and mind are perfectly fine. Thank you for your concern. Then why are you acting this way? Adeline looked at me as if I were a stranger. Why can't you understand that we only want to help? Help me to my house, to my money. I shook my head. I'm not blind, Adeline, and I'm not deaf. I heard what Windsor said to his friends. I saw how you behaved in my house, like owners, not guests. There was silence. Samira and Havelock looked at their parents, waiting for their reaction. Adeline looked confused, Windsor irritated. All right, he finally said, straightening up. You've made your position clear. We understand. This is your house, and you don't want to share it with your family. Fine. But don't come to us when you realize you can't handle it on your own. Windsor! Adeline shot her husband a warning glance. No, Adeline, enough, he ignored her. Your father has made it clear that he prefers his precious house to his family. So be it. But when the time comes, and it will come, Merrick, believe me, when you are too weak to live here alone, don't expect us to rush to your aid. I looked at him, feeling a strange sense of relief. Finally, the masks were off. Finally, the truth was out. I never counted on your help, Windsor. I've only ever counted on myself, my whole life. And as you can see, it's done me more good than harm. Adeline looked from me to her husband, clearly torn between us. But I knew whose side she would ultimately take. She had always chosen Windsor from the very beginning of their relationship. Dad, she made one last attempt. Please, let's not fight. We can find a compromise. Maybe we could only come on weekends? Or only when you give us permission? No, Adeline. No compromises. You have shown that you do not respect my boundaries. You entered my house without permission, used it as your own, planned my life behind my back. I cannot trust you after that. You can't trust your own daughter? Her eyes filled with tears. I can't trust people who have betrayed my trust, I corrected. No matter who they are to me. Windsor took Adeline by the shoulders. Come on, dear. There's nothing more for us to do here. Your father has made his position clear. Adeline hesitated, tears streaming down her cheeks. Dad, please. I think you'd better leave, I said firmly but without malice. All of you. Zamira and Havelock were already standing by the door, clearly ready to leave the unpleasant scene. Windsor pulled Adeline toward the exit. You'll regret this, Merrick, he said over his shoulder. Soon you'll realize that a house is just walls and a roof. Family is what really matters. If you really thought that, Windsor, I replied, you wouldn't be planning to send me to a nursing home for the sake of walls and a roof. He didn't answer, just led Adeline out the door. The twins followed them without saying a word of goodbye, their eyes glued to their phones. I closed the door behind them and leaned against it, feeling my legs tremble. The conversation had exhausted me more than a 12-hour shift in court, but with the fatigue came relief. The truth had finally been spoken. The mask had been dropped. I walked into the living room and sat down in my favorite chair, looking out at the lake through the panoramic window. The sun reflected off the water, creating thousands of sparkling fragments of light. The beauty I had worked for my whole life, the beauty I deserved. Lunch remained untouched in the kitchen. I didn't feel hungry, only emptiness where my family should have been. A real family that supports, respects, and loves. The phone rang. Obadiah was probably worried about how the conversation had gone, but I didn't answer. I needed to be alone, to process everything that had happened, to understand that I had just possibly lost the only family I had. But had they ever really been my family? Or just people connected to me by blood, but not by heart? I stared at the lake without blinking until my eyes began to water. Or were they tears of tension? I wasn't sure. I knew only one thing. I wasn't going to give up. I wasn't going to let them take away what I had earned. I wasn't going to let them decide how I should live and where I should end my days. If they wanted war, they would get it. But I would fight my own way, quietly, methodically, with the patience of a man who had waited 50 years for his dream. After my family left, I sat in my chair for a long time, staring at the lake. Anger, disappointment, resentment, all these feelings swirled inside me like storm clouds before a storm. But I didn't let myself lose control. 75 years of life had taught me one thing. Impulsive decisions are rarely wise. I had to act deliberately, strategically. On Monday morning, I called the company that had installed my first security system. Abbott Security, how can I help you? A woman's voice came on the line. Good morning. My name is Merrick Tremble. I need to significantly upgrade my home security system. Of course, Mr. Tremble. What specifically are you interested in? Everything, I replied. New cameras with facial recognition, motion sensors, an alarm connected to a security console, and most importantly, a system that cannot be disabled without my personal presence. 2 hours later, technicians were already working in my house, installing a new security system. Miniature cameras appeared in every corner, every room, even in the basement and attic. Motion sensors that only reacted to human presence were integrated into the main system. I chose the most expensive service package, which included round-the-clock monitoring and instant security response. "Here you are, Mr. Tramble," said the chief technician, a man in his 40s with a neat beard, handing me a small device the size of a credit card. "This is your personal identifier. The system is configured only for it. Without this device, the alarm will go off even if you enter the correct code." I turned the small device over in my hands. Such a simple thing, but how much peace of mind it would bring me. "And no one can disable the system remotely?" I asked to be sure. "Only in our control center, and even then only after strict identity verification. You have a code word that only you know. Without it, we won't disable the system even if the president calls." After the technicians left, I called Obadiah. He arrived 15 minutes later with a bottle of scotch and an attentive look. "How are you?" he asked, sitting down in the chair opposite me. "Better than could be expected," I replied, pouring whiskey into glasses. "At least now I know exactly what I mean to my family." We drank in silence. The whiskey burned my throat, but it was a pleasant sensation, a reminder that I was still alive, still capable of feeling. "I have a plan," I finally said, "and I'm going to need your help." Obadiah nodded without asking any questions. I told him my idea, and as I explained, his eyes lit up with growing interest. "That's elegant," he commented when I finished. "I didn't expect such sophistication from a court stenographer." In 47 years in court, I've heard many stories of revenge. Most of them ended badly because people acted out of anger. I'm not going to repeat their mistakes. The next day I went to the bank, where I met with my financial advisor, Laurel Beach. She had been working with me for 20 years and knew everything about my finances. "Merrick, it's been a while," she smiled, shaking my hand. "How can I help you?" "I need to set up a trust fund and transfer ownership of my house." Laurel listened attentively, taking notes. "That can be arranged. But Merrick, are you sure? Transferring ownership is a serious step." "Absolutely sure," I nodded. "I want everything to be done as soon as possible." After the bank, I stopped by the notary, then the real estate office. My day was scheduled down to the minute, and by evening, most of the plan had already begun to take shape. When I got home, I found 3 messages from Madeline on my answering machine. Her voice sounded angry at first, then concerned, and finally conciliatory. I deleted all the messages without listening to the end. I didn't need any emotional manipulation right now. I spent the next few days talking to my neighbors. Crestwood was a small, close-knit community. Everyone knew each other, at least by sight. Obadiah helped me organize a small reception at his house, which was attended by almost all the residents of the surrounding houses, 15 people of different ages and professions, but united by their love of quiet life by the lake. I told them my story, without unnecessary emotion, just the facts. How my family had used my house for parties in my absence. How they had planned to send me to a nursing home. How I had decided to teach them a lesson. "I need your help," I concluded my story, "just for one evening." To my surprise, the neighbors reacted to my story with genuine outrage and a willingness to help. Margaret Coalfield, an elderly lady who lived 2 houses down, reacted particularly strongly. "That's outrageous," she exclaimed, tapping her cane on the floor. "Kids these days have no respect for their elders." "Of course we'll help, Merrick. Just tell us what to do." I explained my plan, and by the end of the evening, all the neighbors were on board. Operation Silent Revenge had the full support of the Crestwood community. The next day, a "for sale" sign appeared in front of my house. It was large, conspicuous, and had the real estate company's phone number on it. I arranged with the agent that all calls about the house would be forwarded to me, but from the agency's number, to create the appearance of a real sale. I didn't have to wait long. The phone rang just 2 hours after the sign was put up. "Dad, is it true? Are you selling the house?" Adeline's voice sounded excited. "Yes," I replied dryly. "After our conversation, I realized you were right. This house is too big for me alone." "But why didn't you tell us? We could have." "What? Buy it from me? With what money, Adeline?" There was silence on the other end of the line. "We could have found a way," she finally said. "Windsor could have taken out a loan or—" "Don't worry," I interrupted her. "I've already found a buyer." A young family with children. They offered a good price. So quickly? Her voice sounded incredulous. The house is in excellent condition, in a prestigious neighborhood. Offers like this don't stay on the market long. Silence again, then a deep sigh. Dad, I think we need to talk. In person. Maybe you could come over tonight. I'm sorry, Adeline, but I have a meeting with the buyers and their lawyer today. We need to discuss the details of the deal. I hung up the phone, feeling strangely satisfied. The first part of the plan had worked. The bait had been cast, and the fish had taken it. An hour later, Windsor called. His tone was businesslike, almost friendly. Merrick, Adeline told me about the sale. Listen, I think we got carried away on Sunday. Emotions, you understand. Maybe we should discuss everything again. Perhaps we can find a solution that will suit everyone. What solution, Windsor? I tried to make my voice sound tired and disappointed. Well, for example, he paused. Maybe you could sell the house to us. We could arrange an installment plan or a lease with an option to buy. You could live there as long as you want, and then the house would stay in the family. That was exactly what I expected. Windsor wasn't thinking about me. He was thinking about the house that was slipping through his fingers. That's an interesting offer, I said, but I'm afraid it's too late. I signed a preliminary agreement this morning. Preliminary means it's not final, he said, his voice taking on a note of insistence. You can always change your mind. Find a reason to back out. Listen, let's meet tonight and discuss everything like adults. I'll stop by around 7, okay? I held back a smile. Everything was going according to plan. Okay, Windsor. 7 o'clock after the call, I immediately contacted Obadiah and the other neighbors. The plan was entering its decisive phase. In the evening, around 6:30, I was already at Obadiah's house, watching my house through the window. The neighbors had gathered there, all 15 of them, ready to play their parts in my little play. At exactly 7 o'clock, not only Windsor's car pulled up to my house, but 2 more cars. Adeline, Windsor, the twins, and a few other people I remembered from the camera recordings got out of them. Windsor's friends, the very ones he had bragged to about his house. They brought a support group, muttered Obadiah, standing next to me at the window. Clever. It won't work, I replied, taking out my phone. It's time to start the show. I dialed the number of my security company, Abbott Security. Merrick Trumbull, code word, stenography. I have an unauthorized intrusion on the premises. Please send a squad, understood, Mr. Trumbull. A patrol will be there in 7 minutes. I hung up and nodded to Obadiah. He smiled and left the house, heading toward my property. The other neighbors followed him, splitting into small groups as we had planned. From my vantage point, I could see Windsor trying to open the door with his key, but of course he was unsuccessful. Then he started ringing the bell and knocking. Adeline stood nearby, looking concerned. Their friends shifted from foot to foot, clearly feeling uncomfortable. After a couple of minutes, Obadiah approached them. Good evening. His voice was clearly audible through the open window. Are you looking for Merrick? Yes, Windsor replied. We agreed to meet at 7, but he doesn't seem to be opening the door. Oh, Merrick left earlier today, Obadiah spread his arms. He said he had an important meeting in town. Something to do with selling the house. Selling the house? One of Windsor's friends looked surprised. Are you selling your house, Windsor? Windsor froze, clearly not knowing how to respond. Adeline intervened. No, it's my father's house. He decided to sell it. Your father's? The same friend looked even more puzzled. But Windsor said it was your country house. You used to throw parties there. An awkward silence hung in the air. Several more neighbors approached the group. Oh, you must be the people who threw those noisy parties when Merrick was away? Margaret Colefield asked loudly, leaning on her cane. Very rude of you. Some of us are trying to sleep at night, you know. Windsor and Adeline's faces turned crimson. The friends exchanged glances, clearly feeling betrayed. We had permission, Windsor tried to justify himself. Really? Obadiah raised his eyebrows. Strange. Merrick told me something completely different. He was very upset when he found out you were using his house without permission. So upset that he decided to sell it. What? Adeline turned to Obadiah. He's selling the house because of us? Who else? Margaret shrugged. The poor man worked his whole life to buy his dream home, and his own family invaded it like looters. At that moment, a security company car pulled up. Two burly men in uniform got out and approached the group. "Good evening," said one of them. "We've received a report of unauthorized entry onto the property. May I ask who you are and what you're doing at this house?" Windsor tried to straighten up, putting on a businesslike air. "I'm the owner's son-in-law. We had an appointment." The security guard looked at his tablet. "Mr. Tramble didn't leave any instructions about visitors for today. I'm afraid you'll have to leave the premises." "But this is some kind of mistake," Windsor protested. "We spoke to him on the phone just a few hours ago." "Sir, I'm just doing my job. If you want, you can call Mr. Trumbull and clarify the situation. But for now, I must ask you to leave the premises." Adeline was already reaching for her phone, but I had anticipated this too. My phone was turned off, and all calls were being redirected to voicemail. "He's not answering," she said after several attempts. One of Windsor's friends, a tall man in an expensive suit, stepped aside. "Windsor, what's going on here? You said this was your house. You had a business reception here last week." "I can explain, Jeremy." But it was too late. One by one, Windsor's friends began to return to their cars, casting puzzled and disappointed glances at him. Adeline stood with her hand pressed to her mouth, clearly on the verge of tears. The twins looked at their phones, trying not to make eye contact with their neighbors. "Please leave the premises," the security guard repeated more insistently. Windsor, red with humiliation, grabbed Adeline's hand and pulled her toward the car. The twins followed them. A minute later, all three cars were gone, leaving only a cloud of dust behind. The neighbors began to applaud. Obadiah gave a thumbs up toward the window where I was standing. The plan worked even better than I had expected. Windsor had been publicly exposed in front of his friends and colleagues. Adeline had seen the consequences of their actions. Most importantly, they believed that I was really selling the house. I left Obadiah's house and joined the neighbors, who were still standing outside my house, animatedly discussing what had happened. "Thank you, everyone," I said, looking around at these people who, just a week ago, had been mere neighbors, but now had become something more. "You have no idea how much this means to me." Margaret patted me on the shoulder with her small but strong hand. "You're welcome, dear. It was even fun. It's been a long time since I've been on an adventure like this." We all laughed, and the tension of the last few days began to lift. I invited everyone to an impromptu dinner, pizza and wine on my terrace overlooking the lake. They agreed enthusiastically, and the evening that began as an act of revenge turned into a warm gathering of new friends. Sitting at the table listening to the conversations and laughter of my neighbors, I thought about how strange life is. I had lost my biological family, but I had found a new one. A community of people who respected me, my boundaries, and my right to make my own choices. "To Merrick," Obadiah raised his glass, "and to his brilliant plan." "To Merrick," the others agreed. I smiled, raising my glass in response. The plan had indeed worked perfectly. Now all that remained was to consolidate the result, the final act of my quiet revenge. The next day I called Adeline. Her voice sounded depressed. "Dad, where were you yesterday?" "We arrived as agreed. I had an important meeting in town, Adeline. I thought I'd be back in time, but things took longer than expected." "You could have warned us," she said, her voice tinged with hurt. "We looked silly." "I'm sorry, but I'm calling for another reason. I wanted to let you know that the deal is closed. I sold the house." The silence on the other end of the line was so long that I thought the connection had been lost. "Sold?" she finally managed to say. "So quickly?" "Yes. The buyers offered cash, no mortgage. You don't wait around for offers like that." "But wait, where are you going now? To an apartment?" "No. I decided to follow your advice and think about my future. I'm moving to the Sunny Hills retirement home. They have medical care, meals, everything I need." "A nursing home?" Her voice trembled. "Dad, we never wanted—" "Don't worry, Adeline. It was my choice. As you rightly pointed out, a big house is too much work for someone my age." I could almost hear the wheels turning in her head as she tried to make sense of what had happened, to find some benefit in it for herself. Can I visit you there?" "Of course, whenever you want." After talking to Adeline, I smiled. They believed me. Everyone believed me. Now I could live peacefully in my house without fear of intrusion, and Sunny Hills really did exist. I had rented a small room there in case Adeline or Windsor decided to check up on me. I didn't give them the address of the residence, saying that I was moving in a week and would let them know when I had settled in. In the evening, Obadiah and I sat on my terrace watching the sunset. Obadiah raised his glass. To a successful operation, I smiled, clinking glasses with him. They believed it. They all believed it. Of course they believed it, Obadiah smiled. You turned out to be an excellent strategist, Merrick. Who would have thought that a quiet court stenographer was capable of such sophisticated revenge? It's not revenge, I shook my head. It's protection. Protection of my home, my dreams, my life. Obadiah nodded, looking at me with understanding. So what now? Are you going to live here incognito? For a while, yes, until they lose interest. And then, who knows? We sat in silence, watching the sun sink below the horizon, painting the lake in shades of gold and purple.